episode 21 of Art in the Raw. This episode's going to be a little different. We're doing a social hour this time. What does that mean? We've invited 4 guests back from previous episodes, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. What's going to happen? Even I don't know, so you're going to have to watch to find out. We do have a bit of a plan. We have 2 guests who are photographers, 2 guests who are musicians, and 2 guests who have a lot of knowledge about copyright in the arts, both in visual arts as well as music. So it's going to be a fun conversation, and we're all going to learn a lot as well. If this is your first time watching, definitely go back and check out episodes 1 through 20. But in the meantime, welcome to Art in the Raw Social Hour. I'm your host, Ann Kelly. If this is our first time meeting, you might be also wondering who I am. In a nutshell, I'm someone that has been fascinated with art and music pretty much my entire life. 20 years ago, probably a little longer, I moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico to go to art school and further immerse myself in the arts. I've now been working in the professional gallery world for about 15 years now, and I started Art in the Raw about halfway through 2020. If you'd like to know more, in the description, you can find an interview with me that I did with Len Scratch. But enough about me. I'm excited to introduce my guests to each other and to you as well. So thanks so much for watching. Really appreciate it. Do me a solid and like, comment, and subscribe. Keep the inspiration going. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves. Let's start with Zach. Welcome, Zach.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Zach Wiles. I do copyright for Universal in LA. I also DJ under the name Veda, and we run a radio show, me and a bunch of people on Dash Radio called Tastemakers. So yeah, I work in music. Thanks for having me back out, Ann.
Thanks for coming back, Zach. So Zach was on episode 2. Welcome, Talia.
Hi, thanks for having me back, Ann. I am an attorney in Santa Fe. I grew up here, went away for 10 years for school, and then came back. There was no New Mexico lawyers for the art. So I went on the path of creating that. And what it did is allowed me to really figure out how to stay in the realm of working with artists and filmmakers. I've been working with Malwolf since 2016 as one of their outside counsel. So musician, attorney, photographer.
And you are also a singer, songwriter, kick-ass ukulele and guitar player, and you're working on, there's an album in the process.
I just have to figure out all the CD baby stuff. That's kind of where my gaps are, is on that technology side of just like completing the album work and all of that. So I tend to be a perfectionist, but all the music is ready to go.
Excellent. Well, thanks for coming back. I was on episode 1.
Episode 1.
Yeah, and a few others.
I made guest appearances on two others. So yeah, this is technically my 4th appearance on Art in the Raw. I feel very honored to be here again. Thanks for having me, Ann.
Thank you. And tell the people who you are, in case they haven't seen the episodes yet.
Oh, my name is Michael Kirchhoff, and I am a commercial and fine art photographer. And I write and edit for Analog Forever magazine, which is an online and print publication based upon using analog methods, historical alternative processes in photography. And then I started a site called Catalyst Interviews, where I interview photographers about their creative process. And then I have an online column at 112 Publishing called Traverse, which is basically the same thing I do for the other 2 entities, only Traverse, I'm writing about photographers who work and reside outside of the United States to kind of examine the common thread that we have crossing borders. And all of those things keep me very busy.
Well, thanks for coming back.
Happy to be here.
And Daniel.
Hey everyone, Daniel Gonzalez, portrait and documentary photographer out of LA area, originally from Canada.
Well, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having us.
So to give everybody watching a little background, I had assigned everybody with the task of coming up with at least one question for everybody else, whether it be the same question or unique questions. But I'm just going to throw up a few little parallels right now. Daniel and Michael and Talia are all into photography. So that's something the three of you have in common. And then Zach and Talia, you've got the music thing. Between Talia and Zach, there's a wealth of knowledge just regarding kind of the legal and copyright part of it as well, which is a lot more interesting than most people would think. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Most of us are in California right now, with the exception of Talia and I. Maybe sometime in the future, we'll road trip down and we'll all have a party, maybe on the beach or something.
Can we come to you instead? I'd love for that.
Yeah,
Sure.
I want to go to Santa Fe.
Okay.
For sure.
Yeah.
We'll do a trade. We'll do both, yeah?
We'll do both. It sounds good to me. I'm all for it.
Let's just rent out 10,000 waves or something, man.
Yes. And, that's another parallel I should mention. Zach is also involved in a radio show where he does some interviews with different DJs. So just throwing out some of the reasons I thought this would be a fun group.
So that's interesting. I've been interviewing, like I said, photographers about their creative process. Is it basically the same kind of idea, but from a DJ and music standpoint?
Yeah. There's a radio station based out of LA called Dash Radio, like a satellite-based radio. They have a studio in Hollywood. It's basically like a music and lifestyle kind of thing. So there's 5 or 6 of us that would do it, and so we just get different DJs from mostly the electronic music world, between like house, techno, drum and bass, all that kind of stuff, and bring them into the studio, have an interview. They'd bring a couple songs, because generally they're producers also, so they'd play a couple of their forthcoming tracks, and then they would usually do like a DJ mix in the studio. That started even before me. People I work with have been doing it for probably about 5 years, and then about 3 years ago I came on. A year after that, we started a sub show called The Rewind, which is all kind of like bass music focused, drum and bass, dubstep. And so that's something that I host. We'll bring artists in and we'll give them an interview. And not this year, but in years past, we would take the show on the road and go to music festivals and interview artists at music festivals.
Especially now during COVID times, it keeps you connected to not just the industry, but the people who are driving the industry.
The reason I do it, because I've been a DJ for years, did it more full time when I was younger, and then the older you get, the less that you want to be at a club every night till 4 a.m. And so I was like, I need a job that has like health insurance and stuff. So I went back to school, finished a music degree, and so now I have a day job still in music, but that's what I do for the income now. And so the reason I do the radio show now is just because that's where I came from. I genuinely enjoy the music and just like to connect with the community, and it has been great in COVID like this. We've done a bunch of radio show episodes where we've done interviews over Zoom, and people will record their DJ mix at home and we'll play it on the show, and it's been great to have during this time.
Yeah, I bet. And that's what's interesting that you mentioned community. I mean, that is essentially why we're all together now, is because Anne has kind of built this YouTube channel is in her own interest of community and finding out about the art world and the different aspects. Like you said, you have a day job, and it still involves the music industry, but more in terms of things like copyright. And I know that Talia as well is the same sort of thing. It's nice to have this resource available during a time like this.
I agree.
Keeping me inspired. So that was my purpose, but it's also been great for me as well. And Daniel, you've done at least one interview from your closet. Can we talk about that?
It wasn't quite an interview. It was just so I'm working on this documentary project, and I wanted to kind of experiment with video and video portraits, and I wanted to get some voice over it. So I had my friend, who's a bullfighter, come in, do recordings in the closet.
Maybe it's not an official interview, but you had a bullfighter in your closet with the intention.
Who else can say that, right?
I haven't heard anybody else say that. Anybody else? No.
Well, maybe
the dog had it.
and maybe Anne can put a picture of this up, but I was looking at your website and it looks like you have a photo of the bullfighter and it looks like the universe and the Milky Way is behind them. Is that what the inside of your closet looks like?
It is. How did you know? You can see my bow tie in the background too.
I haven't actually seen that particular picture. Is that
So it's
new on
actually
your website?
bugs. There were all these insects, but the way it looked with the light behind it just looks kind of cool.
I like my story better.
Yeah, I do too. 100%.
So we've prepared some questions for each other. Talia, do you have a question for Michael?
I was noticing the names of your brands.
Mm-hmm.
Catalyst Interviews and Traverse, and then you mentioned crossing borders, and like thinking about these points of crossing and this nexus point that you seem to be so fascinated with. Like, can you talk about that a little bit?
Those are probably very subliminal clues that I could probably spend some time on a therapist's couch talking about as well.
Why not here?
But you're right. I suppose you're right, though. I mean, in talking about crossing borders and like you mentioned, traverse, I mean, that was the whole idea behind that column. Is one of the things that I like to do on my own and as a photographer is travel. I'm always interested in other cultures and specifically how photography operates and is done in other countries, how different people understand it and participate in it. It definitely makes sense. Beyond that, and maybe a little bit deeper, is the fact that I think as I've gotten older, I've realized that I feel the need to kind of branch out. You know, I've been doing photography for a really long time, and while I never really intended to be a writer, I find it to be a very satisfying endeavor most of the time. Sometimes it's very difficult. I mean, I've heard this from other writers too, that it isn't necessarily writer's block. Sometimes it's just tough to get started on something. It's a learning process for me as well. The whole idea behind interviews was that I wanted to learn more about what other people were doing. And I think that in the long run, that helps me as an artist and certainly as a writer to be able to come to a better understanding of how people do things, especially creatively. I've kind of come to this kind of crossroads in my life where I've made specific choices in order to, in a way, take a different path. It's a similar path, but it's different enough to pose more of a challenge to me than I had been participating in before. Because there was even a point in time where I was shooting so much commercially that I got really burned out, and I was actually going to quit photography altogether. I had kind of had it, and I realized it was just the type of work that I was doing. During that time, I was also doing some traveling and taking a lot of personal work. So that personal work that I was doing is what inevitably branched me out into doing fine art photography as well. So I've never felt like I've really had a firm grasp on what it is that I do day to day or in life in general. I always kind of drift from one place to another over time, but somehow I always kind of land on my feet along the way. It's all tied together. It's all based upon my curiosities and interest in what other people are doing, if that answers your question.
I love that. Thank you.
So Michael, what do you have for Talia?
I had watched your Art in the Raw episode the other day, and you were talking about the singer-songwriter aspect of what it is that you do. You not just play guitar, but you also play ukulele. And you had said that you found the ukulele to be a good instrument to compose songs on. And I have never heard that before. How is composing on a ukulele a benefit to songwriting?
I love that you picked that out. That's a very good question. I think that it's ease of access, right? Like it goes anywhere. It's very small. It fits in the overhead compartment of any airplane. You can take it traveling with you. But the instrument itself, it's 4 strings. It's not 6. It's just very accessible for budding musicians, for people that are interested in music. It's a good instrument into music because initially the guitar can feel kind of daunting. I I would say, especially, I mean, this sounds a little like sexist, but especially for women, I feel like, to rap as as a young woman, to wrap your hands around a guitar, it's like hard, but like the ukulele is very accessible. It's just easier to play for smaller hands. So there's that too. That's probably related to the size of hands. It's just easy to pick up. There's nothing serious about that instrument. It's a very playful instrument. It invites creativity, and things just kind of come out that way.
So it's more than just what Tiny Tim played.
Right. I have like, and then it's addictive because I actually talked about this on Anne's show. But yeah, I have multiple ukuleles, and it's hard to stop buying them.
I have a friend who he got into buying guitars, and then eventually it got into buying ukuleles. And I had actually been to a ukulele, I guess, festival, you might say. We were on a job together in Hawaii, and I mean, they're all works of art on their own. I mean, there's some amazing instruments out there, like there are with guitars.
Yeah, I mean, I had to wait for a year each for two of the ukuleles I have. There was a year waiting list.
There are specific people who
Specific artisans that make them. Yeah,
that make them.
That's cool. Thank you for that question. That was fun.
We got to get some ukulele artisans on the show. If anybody knows any, let me know.
I have two, like you said, they're addictive. I bought a guitar once, and it just sat in the closet. And it was just too intimidating, like you said. And I guess I have small hands, maybe, I don't know. And it hurts your fingers, right? The little metal strings. I'm like, man. And then we went to Hawaii, and I was always interested in, I was talking to Anne about that, interested in the ukulele and where it came from. And then bought one, like when it came back, it just kind of stuck in my head. I really wanted to try to figure it out. So I bought one. Pretty soon I had three, and then went back down to two. It went away. But I still don't know how to play it. I'm still working through it. But you're right. It's kind of fun just to kind of mess around with it, and you just kind of creative little outlet sometimes, like a little didgeridoo.
Ukuleles for everyone.
Yes.
I've been tempted. And that was a fun connection that we kind of made as well. Daniel's Portuguese Canadian. You grew up in Canada, but your parents grew up in Portugal. The ukulele was a result of Portuguese sailors landing in Hawaii, basically appropriating that instrument, and it became a thing in Hawaii. And one day, Daniel had introduced me to Portuguese blues. And I think that was around the time that I was recording the episode with Talia. And so I don't know, there's all these fun
little connections,
rabbit holes, connections. I love it. Do you have any ukuleles in the room, Daniel?
Yeah, give me a second. I'm not wearing pants, so I apologize. I'm just kidding.
It's hot in LA. You don't need to wear pants today. So.
Yeah, no, that's why I'm not wearing them. I think it's a soprano. What's the littlest one? What are they called? Like a soprano?
Yeah.
Soprano. Whatever, the biggest one, the concert or tenor, whatever it's called. Nothing like your fancy ones, but I don't know. They're kind of fun.
Oh, those are good looking. It's all about how they sound anyway.
So Talia, do you have any advice for Daniel on learning to play his ukulele?
Just YouTube tutorials.
YouTube. Shout out to YouTube. And Zach, you've got some piano background.
I do. It's funny. I actually do own my girlfriend, who's coincidentally, she's from Hawaii, and she's in earshot, and she'll give me a dirty look unless I say ukulele. I actually do own one of those too, but I never learned how to play it either. And it was back when I was in music school, and that's the reason I know how to play piano, because I had to learn an instrument to graduate, and I knew I didn't have the patience to learn guitar. Picked up piano, and it actually ended up being really fun, and even to the point where I questioned myself. I was like, oh God, like I'm an old rave kid and a vinyl DJ and all this, and I've moved to 3 or 4 different places across the country, and I just bring like 20 crates of records, and they're so heavy, and I'm just like, man, if I just started playing piano when I was a young kid, I would have just had this one piano, and I could just like move with that, and I wouldn't have this huge burdensome. I mean, I love my vinyl, but oh my God, every time I move, I'm just like, why did I pick this addiction and habit? I guess that's a roundabout way of saying, yes, I do play piano. I haven't played piano very much since I've graduated, so I couldn't really call myself a player, but I do really enjoy playing it. I got really into the jazz, like the old school kind of jazz that you play out of like the real book, and kind of, you do a little improvising, a little the Duke Ellington era type stuff. Just music in general is a lot of fun. I guess this might be another art form or whatever, but there's this really, it might still be on Netflix, I'm not sure, but there's a documentary about the people who make Steinway pianos. They're like one of the last hand-built pianos out there. They like carve everything by hand, and they have to mold everything, and it's a huge process, and you, at the end of it, you understand why a Steinway piano costs that much money. It's a very complicated instrument. I played on a Steinway once, and it did sound amazing, but I'm not buying one anytime soon. I have my Casio weighted key Privia keyboard at home. So.
I think it's interesting that you had said that when you had to pick a musical instrument to play in order to graduate, that you thought the piano was less intimidating than a guitar. Because it seems to me like a piano, that seemed to me that this also goes back to the comment or the question that I had for Talia about composing on a ukulele. Like the piano seems like the ultimate in terms of complications and composing music on something like that seems much more serious.
Yeah, I guess you're right. One person sees it one way, and one person can definitely see it another way, for sure. I feel like maybe I just, because I feel like I tried to play guitar, and this will date me, like back when I was like in high school, and I'm trying to play like Zero by Smashing Pumpkins or something on like the guitar, and like I'm just like, oh my god, my hands hurt, and this is so complicated, and like maybe it was just like that kind of memory, and then I was just like, oh, piano, I don't know, I've played chopsticks before. I don't know. And then piano is hella hard. So yeah, so they're both hard. I have maximum respect for actual players. I found out very quickly in music school, it's different than being in history class, because history class, you're like, oh man, I have an exam tomorrow. Let me just stay up all night with a bunch of Red Bull and just like memorize a bunch of facts and pass this test. But like with like an instrument, you can't just cram in a day to actually be able to learn a piece. You have to sit there and you have to put time and energy, and you can't bullshit a music test, really, is really what it comes down to.
Yeah, it's a commitment.
Yeah, definitely. So maximum respect to people who actually play every day, and to people like you, Talia, that actually songwrite, because I had to take some songwriting classes in school, and I thought that was going to be easy, and that actually by far ended up being one of the hardest classes I ever took, just having to actually figure out chord progressions and lyrics and be happy with it.
Well, maybe it's the and be happy with it part.
Yeah.
We are all always our hardest critics, right?
Definitely.
When the album is ready, if we're still in pandemic world, do you have a digital plan to promote it, like a digital format to get it out there?
Yes. And actually this dovetails with the question that I was going to ask Zach, throw it all together. But, one of the kind of the things that's happening now that's obvious to everyone is the death of the album in some ways, because it's all singles now, right? So then the question becomes, as my first album, do I want to put out an album or an EP or just a single, as is everyone else right now? And for me, I feel like these 4 songs really belong together. It's good on an EP, so I'll do that, and then I'll release singles as I move forward. And so, Zach, that was kind of my question for you, knowing about your musical background and professional experiences, is like, what do you think about the death of the album?
That is a very large question, but ultimately it's neither good nor bad, really. It just kind of is the way it is, because I mean the album, all right, I'm gonna try to keep this very short.
No, I think
Yeah,
that
like,
you should go into
yeah,
it. Let's get like salacious.
well, like the album was invented by music companies, and it was dictated by the technology of the time. Music, when it first started to actually be put on something other than one of those player pianos, or the old Victrolas, when music first started actually being put on disc and sold, that is like the birth of like the recorded music industry. You know, before that, music was just on sheet paper, and you had to like actually hire bands or you know, like the guy in the saloon to play music or something like that. You know, when music first started getting put on disc, it was like on 78s, and they were huge discs, and they were really brittle. You could fit like a couple tunes on each side. And when they started marketing and selling this stuff, they would sell a disc, and people would buy one disc and another disc and another disc, and then they would put it in these like jackets that the music industry sold them. And so like then they called them, you know, music albums basically. And then from there, technology started getting better, and you could have, you know, long player vinyl and stuff like that. They were able to put one disc in a sleeve, and then like there's an album. The music industry, they're the ones who have always held all the keys, and so like this system for them worked great. If you think about any tune from the 80s, it's like, man, I really like, you know, I Need You Tonight on NXS, that album. All the rest of the album is kind of crap. But like if you wanted that song, you had to buy that album. That was great for them. Wasn't necessarily like good or bad for anybody else. But now with digital, it's like that whole thing went away. Really, at the end of the day, the end of the album is not really the end of the world for the musician. And really, the great thing about the end of the album is it's leveled the playing field and given all the keys of the kingdom and the driver's seat, or whatever you want to call it, like back to the artists. You can do whatever you want. You can release an album. You can just release singles. You could just release 3 or 4 tunes. You could release a tune every week. You could do it exclusively on streaming. You could do it as part of a video. Yeah, so you have so many things that you want to do. And now the question is like, how do we make money off that as an artist? And I think with everybody in this chat, that's kind of the burning question of like the last 10 years. And that's kind of my question for all of you all too, is which we'll get to. But hopefully does that answer anything?
Yeah, I love that perspective of the death of the album is like the liberation of the indie artist. And I can see that financially too, right? I love that. Yeah, thank you.
I mean, I guess I remember buying single cassette tapes.
In Los Angeles, when I was growing up, there was a record store not far from my house. It was in Pasadena. It was called Moby Disc Records, and they used to bring in all of these import albums from all over the world. They would have unique single pressings of a lot of the bands that I liked. When a band would issue a single, they would put it on the vinyl, and then there would be a B-side that you wouldn't show up anywhere else. It was never on the actual album. So it was a chance to get something kind of unique. The sleeve that it was in was unique artwork as well. The flip side was the B-side, and you could have something that nobody else has. And I still have a lot of those discs that have music that hasn't really been issued anywhere else. So it's kind of a rarity item. It would be a full-size vinyl disc, but it was only one song. Sometimes it would be two, but usually just one song on each side. And the quality was always very good. The more grooves that are on a vinyl album, the lower the quality gets. So if you can fill up a side with one song, it's going to have probably a better sound quality to it.
Yeah, they discovered that by accident too. The 12-inch singles, like you were talking about, you know, that was, I mean, a lot of that's owed to the beginning of like DJing and stuff like that. Actually, there's a great book called "Last Night a DJ Saved My Life," and they used to press all the singles on the 7 inches on the 45s, and this guy Tom Moulton, I think his name was, he wanted to press this single, but they were all out of 45 blanks. And so they were just like, all right, well, we have all the LP blanks. Let's just use one of those and see what it sounds like. And with all the grooves spread out, the quality of the music, fidelity or whatever it's called, just like went through the roof. That was kind of the birth of 12-inch singles, I guess. Anyway, that's just my little nerdy factoid dovetailing off what you were saying.
I think a lot of artists at that time, I think it kind of benefited them as well, because they were known. They would issue singles that they wouldn't normally do, just so that they could offer something else to their fan base. And especially a lot of bands that didn't get a lot of airplay on the radio, in order to be able to do something like that to offer to their fans, in terms, obviously they're making money off of it, which is great. They're going to disappear if they're making money off of it. So yeah. It had a benefit in terms of promotion.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess Talia, really to more succinctly answer your question is what you should do is how you should release, to look at it either from an artistic perspective of like if how you feel like it should be released. I think that's the way I would go. The monetary thing, obviously we all need to make money at what we do, but making money off the recording now has become
Yeah,
vastly more
it's so
complicated.
true. Well, and
Um,
I think that we've like reverted back to the song, and maybe this kind of dovetails with like how we can do whatever we want with our music and release it however we want. But okay, so there's a devaluation. If we go back to kind of like the 70s and before, when it was more that the song was a marketing tool and that you use to get people to know about your music, and then the money comes in merch and live shows and touring, those kinds of things, or maybe even sync licensing, then it makes sense again.
Yeah, and I think that's actually where a lot of the money nowadays is being made, especially for an indie artist. Between, I guess, not so much this year, but definitely live touring and merchandise and doing physical sales with like the bundling thing. I see that a lot. Some sort of merch mixed with a cassette tape or whatever. Oddly enough, people are buying cassettes still. And I just got an email that from work saying that vinyl actually outsold CDs this quarter. Like, what's the music business like now? Well, it's like this. What it'll be like in 3 months, it'll probably be different. It's just it's just kind of the way it's been for like the last couple of years.
I would love to do a small press of vinyl.
There are people who are doing it, especially in the electronic music world. They're still doing vinyl. Vinyl's still very much alive with the DJ culture.
I vote for the 12-inch single.
Oh, well, maybe I'll have to just think about that now. That's
Yeah.
kind of...
With the 3 songs on the other side.
Yeah.
You
No.
get best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Well, that's a crazy thing with music, how they've just started compressing it over the years, and people who have grown up in the era of compressed music, we don't even really know the difference.
And that's another gigantic question. Do MP3s and waves actually sound that different? They do, I guess, on paper. And you can hear it in a club if you're DJing a wave and an MP3. There is a little bit of loudness difference. Scientifically, like all those frequencies in a wave that are there, like the ear can't even really hear them anyway. I don't know. The DJ test is like, does it make you dance? If it makes you dance, okay, great. Good.
That's a good test.
Actually, I think that's a good life test.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we dance after recording this episode? That's how we know it was successful.
Yeah, exactly.
Why wait till after?
Yeah. I don't have I've got a bunch of snowboards behind me, so it'd be maybe
Do you have your snowboard that breaks into two and like James Bond type?
I do. You want to see
I
it?
haven't seen this thing yet. I've heard of it, but I haven't really seen one before.
Wow,
Let's see
that's
if
an
we can
actual thing. I thought you were making a joke.
get this one.
No, yeah,
Oh,
right.
here it is. Oop, I'm hitting the fan.
So check that out.
I don't know if you can really see it, but
Oh, it splits in half vertically?
yeah, it splits in half. Shout out Heather Pritchard for selling this to me. So it turns into skis, so you can put skins on the bottom, cross country up, basically, and
Oh,
then
that's
it's a
crazy.
snowboard. On the way
Today I
down.
learned.
Yeah. If you can see, like, how you can switch the bindings from ski
That's
to
cool.
snowboard mode.
So do you have to have different boots as you're going up?
Same boots, yeah. That's
Same
part of
boots.
the beauty part of it. Talia, for example, has some skis that with skins, and she can just skin up. And I'd be with friends like her before I had this board, and before I would be carrying my snowboard on my back up the mountain. So now I can skin up with the other skiers. Yeah. And I actually grew up skiing, so the first time I was doing it, I was like, oh wow, I feel like I'm on skis again. And I don't think it would be safe to ski on that.
Which do you prefer, skiing or snowboarding?
I don't know. I actually haven't skied since I was about 9 years old. But I started skiing when I was 3. So I've been snowboarding much longer than that. And I love snowboarding, and I have all the stuff. So there's that. I am curious though, what would happen if I put on skis.
That should be recorded for an episode of Art in the Raw.
I've threatened to record an episode heading up the mountain. What do you think, Talia? We skin up and talk about.
And Greg has the GoPro that we can use. Yeah, let's do it.
It could happen. Just combine all the things that we love into one episode. So our friend Lisa is a bagpipe player, and she's known to snowboard down the mountain on the last day with the bagpipes. So good call. I think we definitely have to do an episode with Lisa and her bagpipes, and Talia, you'll bring the ukulele, and Greg could bring a musical instrument too.
Questions for all three of you because you all work in the photography area. I started out as a vinyl DJ and I have lots of records. I've touched on this. Everything's very digital now. It's a similar trend that's happened in film too, right? Vinyl still exists, but obviously film still exists to some degree. Where's film now in the world of photography?
Also a very big question. I mean, we started Analog Forever magazine because of our love. And when I say our, myself and a guy named Michael Beelan, who's basically my partner in creating the magazine. And then we have a couple of other people that are on our team who also do photography in analog fashion. It was the love of using these analog processes that drove us to investigate what other people are doing with it as well and publish it online and in print. In recent years, we've actually seen a huge amount of growth in the film photography industry. A lot of it actually has to do with the fact that digital has helped it along the way. I had a conversation with Melanie Bostic, who is in Santa Fe. She's one half of Bostic and Sullivan, and they provide chemistry and supplies for people who do what most people refer to as alternative processes, but are actually historical processes, photographic processes that were started in like the 1800s, 1900s. And when the rise of digital took place, their business model started to fail. People weren't interested in doing that anymore. Everybody was moving into digital. And it wasn't until there was a way to create what we now refer to as a digital negative. Basically, you can take a digital photograph and print out a negative with a digital printer that you can now contact print or print through an enlarger or do any number of things with in an analog or historical process way. And when that happened, their business shot through the roof, and now they sell more than they ever have before in their lives. So digital has helped prop up the analog industry, and now through the things that I've been seeing and doing Analog Forever, both and honestly my own work as well, there are more quote unquote hybrid creative processes now that are going on in photography. There are very few people who are true purists who will shoot like an 8x10 or 11x14 camera and take that, process that negative in chemistry and then make either enlargements or contact prints from that negative where it's just pure analog processes. Everything is chemical and physical and nothing exists in a digital space whatsoever until somebody like takes a picture of it and puts it on Instagram. That is a very small part of it now, but I honestly, and I'm taking up like all of this, all of the time in talking about this, but I actually see the future of photography as an analog medium. I think the digital photography will start to disappear. And when I say digital photography, I mean the point and shoot cameras, the phone, the cameras even in your phone. I think that over time, those will begin to disappear because photographs for advertising and editorial and corporate use are all going to be created with artificial intelligence. We're already seeing that, like every photograph you see, every billboard, every magazine cover, all of those photographs have been digitally manipulated in some way, and most of them are composites of more than one image. So wow. I think that as progress continues to move forward in the industry, that's essentially where things are going to go, and it'll be a slow decline, but I think it's a decline that eventually is going to happen. And in order to be creative in photography, I think you're going to need to embrace a hybrid approach or an analog approach. And I could go on talking about it for long.
So as usual, I can't help myself. Are those Ilford boxes behind you, Michael? On the top of the
They
flat?
are.
Can't even read that. I just know what an Ilford box looks like.
Yeah.
Are those boxes full of unexposed paper, or are there prints in those boxes?
Those are full of proof sheets. I've been going through the last, I would say, 12 years. Part of my flat file drawers were filled with work in progress projects, original Polaroid prints and Polaroid negatives and other film negatives and prints that I have made over the last approximately 12 years. And they started to accumulate to the point where they were spilling over into each other and they were all getting mixed up. So I decided to take my COVID time and organize all of it. I'm about 90% done with it all. There's a few loose ends, but yeah, all of these envelopes are full. Everything here, there's another stack that you can't see. There are boxes that are filled with negatives and prints. I actually had to order more boxes because they didn't have enough. There are literally thousands of Polaroid prints and negatives surrounding me right now that I've had spent the past 3 weeks going through and trying to organize. And now I have to scan a lot of them and turn them into digital photographs in order to share them with people, because most of the stuff we share is through digital means.
So yeah, the whole digital versus analog thing, it tends to come up regardless of the medium. Yeah. And it's something I get asked about a lot as well, just in terms of what is better. My answer as a gallerist is really, it just depends on what you're doing. I'll use Michael as an example. He does fine art work and he also does commercial work. It doesn't make any sense for him to do his commercial work with film. The fine art work, you can kind of slow down and use film if it suits you. I think it's just the medium that inspires you. It's whatever that is. There's not one's better than the other.
And depends on the project too and the use, right? I mean, that can kind of be fluid. And the whole digital versus analog, I think that's been like, I don't know if it's a trend or what, but it's been kind of like widespread. I mean, there's been like this whole resurgence of, the butcher shop where people are, becoming like, I want to know the cuts of meat. I really want to go back to this time where people knew a lot about something, or they're making something with their hands. Barbershops, right? Like you got this whole resurgence of barbershops where people are going to school for that and stuff. So I think that's just kind of this almost like a push against digital and technology. And I think to simpler times, because it's all kind of overwhelming, right? I think we all kind of feel overwhelmed a lot of the time. So I feel like there's this kind of this overwhelming push against digital and going back to handmade, craft, unique.
I've definitely heard that story from a lot of educators who are teaching younger kids, where there's all of a sudden this interest in it just because digital has become so predominant.
Yeah, we've already had the discussion about vinyl, about the resurgence of vinyl. It's a very similar road they're going down.
All connected, as I like to say.
And that's magic, right? Like you put a piece of white paper and it becomes something. You're like, whoa. Same thing with the record. It's like, what? How are these little bumps? Like, how does that sound like something, right? It's just kind of something magical to it. It's kind of hard to wrap. I mean, digital is even more confusing, but it's like we're so used to it. It's kind of like boring. You're looking like, what? How does that work?
Right.
Right.
And the other correlation that you can make too is photography is shared predominantly now through computers, monitors, the internet, but you'll often hear artists and people like Anne say, you need to look at these photographs in person, because the tangible qualities, the visual qualities that you see with your own eyes are something very different. And it's similar to, in the music industry, putting on a CD or a vinyl album or experiencing a live performance. The live performance is always going to be so much more dramatic and so much more, fulfilling. So, and that goes with DJing as well. I mean, it's interactive. You're immersed in the music now. That's what people crave, especially now.
I keep hearing about Twitch. Zach, is that one of the main platforms for live streaming music now?
It has become very popular in the pandemic. Before the pandemic, it was mostly the hangout for gamers and some live streamers and music and stuff like that. And now people are streaming pretty much anything on Twitch. And so they're having their YouTube moment. A lot of the DJs that I know seem to prefer Twitch. Twitch is cool. It's just one of the many ways to reach the people that you want to connect with. I think the interesting thing about artists is they do want somebody to see or hear what they're creating at the end of the day. But at the same time, they really do feel compelled to do this even if nobody sees it. It's an interesting thing. I kind of ascribe to that whole thing like the Greeks back in the day with like the concept of the muse. People feel driven to create because something outside of them is drawing this out of them. Or this might be getting a little too new agey or old agey at this point.
I'm into
Twitch.
it.
Twitch is cool.
An interesting thing about Twitch, a couple, I'd say 3 or 4 months ago, a bunch of influencers got a ton of their archive content removed without warning from Twitch. And it just like sent this reverberation of fear through content creators about using it. So I was curious about, I haven't looked at it lately, about, if that was a lasting change or if it's kind of back to normal.
I think they haven't gotten their stuff in line yet legally. Maybe they have at this point, but Twitch is suffering the fate of what happens when something is popular and then is really cool to use, and then all of a sudden becomes popular enough that the people who own everything, big business wise, look at it and they say, "Oh, we should be making money off this," and so then they kind of flex a little bit. I work for the music business, I work for a major player in the music business, so I mean, like, the infringement, it's a real thing, but I'm also a DJ. I'm playing both sides, I guess.
So in terms of licensing, Jack, how does that work? I've always wondered, like, when you have like DJ mixtapes or like even when you're playing it, like, how does that work? Is it cool to do that? Like, if you have to get a license for that, or how does that work?
That definitely falls into the realm of the gray area still, but it is being defined in some ways. DJing live, just like a musician, is covered by the venue. The venue typically has their blanket licenses in place where they pay out. So the artist who plays at a venue is not responsible for any sort of like performance royalties because the venue takes care of that. It becomes different when it comes to streaming, and this is why you don't really see like Spotify and other similar places that just do straight up DJ mixes, because the royalties and the payouts, it's very confusing to figure out how to pay out on a DJ mix, because who gets more money, and it's very complicated as far as, this song was on for 2 minutes, but this song was on for 3 minutes, but these two songs kind of were combined on top of each other, and so like it's very confusing. And so a lot of places like Spotify, they're just like, okay, we're going to play single songs and we're going to pay on that. And then something like SoundCloud has always been a home for DJ mixes and things like that. But from day one, SoundCloud's terms of service was like, we're not supposed to do this. We put up original content only. There really is no home legally for a DJ mix out there. DJs have always been the promotion arm of the music. So a lot of times they've been given a pass. Kind of lives in the gray area though.
I mean, I've even thought about at work trying to create a portfolio with works by multiple photographers, and just thinking about the accounting for that has given me a big enough headache to decide not to do it.
Yeah.
And it seems way less complicated than this print is going to be a combination of Daniel's image and Michael's, but it's 20% Mike. Like that would, no, that's just.
DJs have always kind of been underground, and so they'll just generally just make something, they'll put it out there, and then they figure out the details later.
So do DJs, did they come up with like DJ names as like, maybe is it a way to like kind of evade like that? That's kind of curious.
I don't think anybody renames themselves as a DJ really to avoid that kind of stuff. But maybe they do. I don't know. I think it's always just, there's a lot of interesting nuance behind that as far as like why DJs rename themselves, like you see it in hip hop, you see it in like drum and bass. You don't really see it so much in house, although people do it. A lot of the house music DJs, a lot of the original New York underground, like early pre-disco days and stuff, they didn't rename themselves. Hip hop kind of was like the birth of this whole artistic movement in a lot of ways, which kind of dovetailed from disco, because I mean, like, disco is early disco, which, and not like Bee Gees disco, was all happening at the same time that graffiti was starting to happen. All the albums at the first hip hop party they weren't rap records. Salsa, it was like all kinds of different records, early disco stuff, world music, like all kinds of stuff like that. I'm getting way too big here, but DJs name themselves for a variety of reasons. I chose my name because Veda is it's a Sanskrit word that just means like revealed truth. Just thought that sounded kind of cool, and also is kind of the ethos that I bring to the reason I like DJing is just because you have all these disparate elements and you try to like mix them all together to try to make one thing. So I thought that was kind of cool. That and I didn't want everybody to know my first name. So you see some strangers on the street, I didn't want to be like, hey, what's up, Zach?
Zach. Art, when you're appropriating art, there's usually that rule that you have to change the visual image by a certain percentage.
That's a myth.
Is that a myth?
The test is whether it's transformational, right? Which is kind of the most esoteric legal test there is.
Yeah. I mean, the whole fair use thing is that's what all the DJs and the producers used to try to hide behind. And there's all kinds of, Talia said, myths around that, between like, oh, if you only sample 7 seconds, it's legal, and only if you use like a certain thing, and none of that's really true. At the end of the day, if you're using any part of a recording, you are using somebody else's thing. And I don't know how that works visually, but like the fair use thing, which is like the statute of copyright law or whatever, gosh, I can't even really remember it off the top of my head, but it's really just like if it's causing confusion in the marketplace,
that's like
then
one factor, right? There's like
Yeah.
4 factors. You have to look at both works, compare
Yeah.
them, see if there's any if they're substantially similar, then you're screwed. But basically the test is, did you transform the use? So they look at the use and the purpose of the original work and see if like the purpose and use of the allegedly infringing work is different. So for example, I mean, it's also parody. It involves parodies. Like there's a Roy Orbison case, and I can't recall the name of the rock band, but they covered Pretty Woman. It was like a metal rock band, and they covered all of the lyrics, but they switched them up a little, so it was kind of a parody of itself. Roy Orbison's estate sued, and it was found to be fair use because they were actually commenting on the original work, which was the original test. Is if you're commenting on the original, it was completely pure parody. If you're commenting on the original work and you're critiquing or commenting on it or making some kind of societal contribution that relates back to the original work, then it's fair use. And we've really expanded it since then to a transformational standard.
Does that fit that requirement that it's kind of like transformed in terms of its original use, and now it's parody, so that kind of fits that? Or is that a separate requirement?
No, it's all the same, but like usually parody is easier to argue. I mean, there's been some cases of people saying something's parody when it's really not and failing at that. If you're commenting on something, that's a freedom of speech issue in a lot of ways. We want to be able to comment on our society. We want to be able to make fun of things and allow people to make fun of things. And I mean, that's another issue, kind of like that sidelines with what Zach brings up, is like if we have this small group in control of everything and they're controlling the messaging, then we can't really create new works of art that might rely on previous works.
Copyright has kind of become like the rallying cry of people who own everything. I guess copyright can be viewed very negatively among like younger people and creators, and for one reason or another. But really the purpose of copyright is to be able to have people feel like they can create something and to feel confident that no one else will steal it. It's meant to protect your work. You don't even have to register a copyright to have copyright protection in the US. I mean, you do if you want to bring a case against somebody. That's kind of like the number one question I get. Why should I copyright something? It's like, well,
Helps.
there's a lot of different reasons, but technically, no, you don't have to copyright anything, but there are good reasons for it. So, and that's a whole other, that'll just put everybody to sleep.
But Talia, is that the main difference, is if you copyright or not? From my understanding, is that you can go after a larger sum as opposed to just like the fair use or whatever it is. Or
it supersizes your rights. You still have a copyright if you don't register, but if you don't register and you actually want to use your copyright as a sword and not just a shield, then you need to register it.
That's a great analogy. I'm gonna start using that.
yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
And the flip side of that too is the fact that the U.S. Copyright Office doesn't exactly make it a very, like, it's not a simple process at all.
No.
It's complicated, it's problematic.
And they're very picky. They're very picky. I fight with them all the time.
Yeah,
they're
very picky. You're so right.
Well, one of the nice things that happened recently too for photographs, there's now a vehicle for photographers to pursue monetary damages for copyright infringement that takes place in a sort of like a small claims court. A lot of photographers, especially because of things like Instagram and social media, photographs are getting taken by larger corporations from photographers through digital media or social media and used in ads. The photographer says, well, like, you can't do that. The company says, do something about it. The photographer says, I'm going to hire a lawyer. The company says, that's great. We have 15 lawyers right here who are ready to take up that case. And the photographer doesn't stand a chance, and they will literally go broke trying to seek compensation. So this new office is literally something that just has happened in the last few months.
Have they approved that? Is that gone live?
I don't know if it's 100% approved, but I used to serve on the board of APA, the American Photographic Artists. It's a nationwide organization. It's like ASMP, PPA, a lot of the other photography organizations. They've all kind of banded together to pursue approaching Congress people about forming this sort of branch of the U.S. Copyright Office, so that photographers have some sort of recourse. I'm not on the board anymore, so I'm not as involved as I used to be. They made an announcement that this is what was going to be taking place, and it's probably not 100% set in stone yet. I don't know if there needs to be a vote or what, but it was finally moving in a positive direction after literally
so long,
15 years of trying.
Yeah, thank goodness. We need it so badly.
So, I mean, that's a step in the right direction.
That's great to hear.
I have a question about that as well. Right now, there's a case, a professional basketball player who used a photograph of themselves that a photographer took on their Instagram feed. The photographer sued, and now the basketball player and his lawyers are suing the photographer because he has photographs of this athlete on their website. So they're arguing that you're using it, let's see, without a model release for commercial purposes because it's on your website and your website's purpose is to advertise your work. So obviously it's like a strong arm thing to try to get them to back off because they're trying to, I guess, settle. But I was just wondering about that, like, because that's something that I've often wondered about too. It's like if you put something on your website, it's, I guess, a portfolio, right? The player is probably here. He plays for LA.
Oh, in California, because California has a decent publicity rights of publicity statute, from what I understand. So it depends on the state. Yeah, it's an interesting issue. It would be where it's taken and potentially where that income stream is landing. And I think it also comes down to how famous this basketball player is, because if he's a public figure, then that's probably going to be a defense that they use if he is going after them. But it's been a second since I've reviewed California's publicity statute, but I think it's pretty strong. It's pretty solid. I mean, there are some rights there. There's a newsworthy exception, right, which is what the paparazzi rely on. But if you're selling it in a gallery, your purpose and use changes, which is transformative. That's what we're talking about, right?
That's actually very similar to a lot of what happens with photographers who do performance photography, especially like concert photographs. Like I think there was a case from a photographer that he brought up a case against Ariana Grande for using his photographs. I think it was as simple as something as she used them on her Instagram. And he said, well, those are my photographs. And she said, yeah, but it's a photograph of me. So I should be able to use a photograph of me. I'm the brand, and I should be able to use that picture. And I don't know. I think there's been similar cases with, I think, Taylor Swift. I know that a lot of bands, even bands like the Foo Fighters, have had issues with photographers taking photographs at their shows and saying, if you take photographs at our shows, we get to use them however we want, or else don't take them.
Yeah, that's difficult because it's kind of like they're tying each other up. But you know, it's if the photographer is the one who's shooting the images and the copyright belongs to the photographer. So yeah, you can't just say that unless you're arguing some kind of implied license by putting it out in the marketplace, or it's a stock photo image, or you know, something like that. But you can't just say because it's a photo of me, I get to use it. Although it's really enticing to want to do that.
In some cases, the photographers benefit by, you know, if your form of payment is I have 100 more people that like my Instagram page, if that's good enough for you, then great. But that doesn't
Credit
pay
goes
bills.
a long way.
Yeah,
Credit goes a long
Yeah.
way, especially with like influencers and Instagrammers. I mean, like
yeah,
the Richard Prince lawsuits are a great adventure into all of that with his, you know, appropriating influencer images that aren't being used for commercial purposes and blowing them up really large to 4 or 6 feet, and you know, selling them at Gagosian Gallery for like, you know,
100,000.
500,000 a piece to like 1 million. Is that transformative? I mean, a lot of people are upset about that, but it's a good question.
And there's a parody too, because I think he would make comments on it. He
It's
would
a
make like a fake
parody.
comment or something. Yeah, so see, I learned something new too.
People
Everyone's
have a
learning.
whole
right.
thing about that case. That case is amazing.
Well, there was the case too, because he had taken he had literally just lifted images off of Instagram, not just the image, but the comments and the likes that showed up on there, and made
And
prints of
he
them.
was a commenter. You know, he inserted himself in
Yeah,
the comments and then made other comments be deleted. And he wrote this like, you know, he's an appropriation artist. He never used to talk about his work, but then he wrote this like long blog about his process of taking the Instagram image and trying to delete the comments so his image started first, and like making these, it called it bird talk, like his responses to the comments. So it's very interesting that he kind of turned around his initial, he had another lawsuit before that where he won, and kind of changed fair use law. And then he challenged that and tried to expand upon it. It was like, oh, so your answer in my case that I won is that as long as I'm commenting on somebody's image, I can appropriate it. Well, what about if it's this blatant? It's very interesting.
Okay, in most of our cases, most of the creative things that we're doing, we're just doing them because we love to do them. It's not necessarily an immediate monetary gain that is motivating us. Yeah, just because we love it. What is that in all of us that, you know, maybe you work a 40-hour week, but you come home and you just feel driven to create this thing? Where does that come from? What is that? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I'm sure we all do.
Big question.
yeah, you're right. Yeah, this is full of big questions today. But you're right. I mean, I think, like you're saying, the creative part of what we're doing is driven by something that's very internal, something that's passionate about expressing ourselves, whether it's through music or photography or any art form. Through the investigating of a lot of the photographers and the photographs I've been looking at through the different venues, and I know that Anne sees this a lot too, being a gallerist. A lot of the work that's being created is being created by people who are doing it. They aren't doing it full time necessarily. A lot of people have day jobs. Probably I would think that it's the predominant truth that most people have day jobs outside of this passion that they have, and it just gives them a creative voice. Sometimes monetizing that is important to them, and sometimes it's not. I mean, I know plenty of people who have very lucrative careers. I actually did a feature on somebody who works in the medical field, and he makes an incredible living, but he has a creative side to him that takes place through photography and printmaking, and he makes some like really crazy, dark, often disturbing imagery, but it's all kind of based upon his past and how he sees the world and his life in the medical profession. He doesn't need to make a dime off of photography. He can just do it because he loves it. That's actually kind of freeing to a certain degree too, because he doesn't care what a gallerist thinks. He doesn't care what an editor thinks. He's just making art for himself. And if you respond in a positive way to that, well, that's just gravy, right? And he got my attention, and I was able to write about it and show the work, and people love it. Well, some people hated it, but most people loved it. But that's what's great. It begins that, there's a conversation about art that arises out of it. And that's all he really cared about.
And I think that's different for everyone, right? I mean, it's just kind of like some people are into racing cars, some people are into ukulele, some people are into photography, DJing, whatever. It's like, and what is that? It's like sometimes it's hard to figure out, right? Because you're saying it's almost like this like intangible thing. It's like something that you're driven to do, whether it's for money, probably not. If we're talking about like from an artist's perspective, what drives you to do something? There is no immediate financial reward, but why is it that you do that? That is kind of interesting to. It's more like a psychological therapy question. We got to get a little couch on the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's really getting into the art world to make a lot of money. Fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the people that do that actually make a good living off of something like photography or anything in the arts for that matter.
Yeah. So I mean, just a lot of the things we were talking about prior to this involved money as the motivation. So it's just something that I've been thinking about a lot recently. And like Talia, you've worked a 57-hour week, but you can't wait to get home and play some songs. Like where does that come from?
It's an impulse. Like you were saying, it's not even something that you think about as being a chore. And maybe that's because it isn't something that, I have to do to make money. Maybe there's something significant about that. But I think that it brings up a bigger question about value, how we value things, and having those daily rituals and practices that we incorporate that bring more meaning into our lives. We're often creative. It can be anything. And so I think that's a way for people to relate to that question who may not initially relate to it, is like, what are the daily rituals and practices, that bring meaning to your life?
And I think we're all lucky to have that. Not everybody necessarily does.
But I think everybody should. It's therapeutic, not necessarily just with photography, music especially. I mean, there's like a release that happens. It brings a certain kind of peace of mind, I think. Listening to music, playing music, or any art form, it's therapeutic. Everybody should have some kind of a creative outlet in their life, because I think it's just healthy.
So if you're watching and you don't have that, we encourage you.
Yes, watch Art in the Raw.
Watch Art in the Raw.
Get an art education.
That was part of my intention, and I might need to actually bring a psychologist on the show to maybe participate in this conversation.
Right? Can we all show up?
I have one in mind. I do know one. So
free therapy.
Yeah. So maybe the next Art in the Raw social hour, and this is, by the way, the first Art in the Raw social hour. We wasn't really sure how this was all going to go down. I had a good feeling about it, much like the first episode of Art in the Raw. It just kind of unfolded. I've been a terrible moderator. Did anybody not ask their question?
I always have so many questions. I'm like, that's why I'm a photographer, because I like want to understand things. So Zach, on your first review, you were talking about the Northern Soul in the UK, and I thought and I looked into that because I'm like, that sounds interesting. Kind of like sounds like it was like kind of like the first raves, kind of before raves were around or something. So very similar kind of idea where you had like total take over a place, spin some records, whatever, all night. I was just curious, like what is it now? Because I know like when I was in college, they had like the Tampa breakbeats. I was like all into that kind of scene. I missed out on the whole ecstasy thing. I was too nerdy, but I was into like the whole music thing. I was just kind of curious, what do you think what's today's version of all that? Is it still electronic? Is it?
The electronic music is still very much out there, and the marriage of technology and music, which really you can say is really grown ever since the beginning of recorded music, ever since 78. Like I was talking about in the beginning, it's all just really developed. Now it just develops at a exponentially faster rate than it did maybe in the early 1900s, between Northern Soul, then moving into disco, and then moving into hip hop, and then how, like, you know, house and house bred techno, and from there it just started really branching out into those like coastal breaks, like down in Miami, Tampa, and Miami booty bass. It just keeps growing and reinventing itself, and not even to say anything about, you know, like hip hop and where that's gone and what's different now. It's kind of coming in on itself again. The lines are being very much blurred. When I was going to raves, it was very much like people were like, oh, I'm into hip hop, or I'm into house, or I'm more into drum and bass. People were very much, they had their focus. And, you know, now I see people, a lot of these producers now, they produce something, it's got like trap drums to it, but it's got house melody lines and, you know, hip hop samples in it. And so everything is very much being combined and reinventing itself. And it belongs with the youth. I am always out there listening, but really at the end of the day, I'm not the person to ask about that. It's like, what are the kids doing now? I don't even know. I mean, I'll always still go out, you know, and play music and DJ just because I love all that stuff. You know, music's in clubs now, like in LA, like you, like, I don't know if you guys partake, but before COVID, you know, like the LA warehouse scene was pretty poppin'. Underground parties, cash bars, catchy parts of town. And that was pretty much how it was back in the 90s. Like what you were talking about, like the first interview I had with Anne, like I called it perennial. And I think it still is like that. It's just kind of, it grows over here, it grows over here, it constantly reinvents itself.
I just moved out here recently, so I'm still
Oh, really?
kind of
Okay.
trying to get the lay of the land. Yeah.
A lot of people will have off the books kind of music shows out in these warehouses out here. And it feels like it did back in the 90s. Younger kids these days are so funny because, you know, and this makes me definitely sound like an old person where I'm like, kids these days will say, oh, I'm a rave kid. And I'm like, you're not a rave kid. You know, electronic music, and you go to a club, you weren't there, man. The beginning where it was just people with like overhead projectors taking little pieces of like colored dye and mixing it all together and everything. And like everyone's like, oh my God, that's so crazy. Incense everywhere, you know, and like Vapo Rub and like all that crap, you know. But you know, it's kind of like that again now. Maybe they are rave kids again, and I'm just old and possibly just
So
jaded.
Michael, I think you mentioned that your dad had gotten you, or he'd gotten a Polaroid SX70 or something like that as the first camera.
Yes.
And then your analog. I was just curious, like, what would be like your desert camera if you could only have one process?
It would probably be what I'm still working with right now, although there is an end to it because I'm still using film that predominantly that it hasn't been made since 2007. One of the materials that I use now and have used since I first started in photography is a Polaroid positive negative film. It's just something that I've really embraced in terms of my photography because a lot of my photography is based upon flaws and my past. I'm going to continue doing that as long as I possibly can. They probably won't work the same way for anybody else. My work has kind of become synonymous with that.
Anne, I have a question for you.
Okay.
So we've talked about the death of the album. We've talked about the slow death of digital photography, but kind of looking at the death of the gallery during this time as well. I mean, so many galleries are going out of business. So how have you had to change your advertising practices and connecting with collectors, and what has that looked like?
It's just been having to be a little extra creative and finding new ways to connect with our clients. So it's more been about figuring out how to do online exhibitions and have those online exhibitions be really good, as opposed to just going to the website and looking at some pictures, something people could have done before. Making more video content. Living in Santa Fe, we usually, on average, as I understand it, have about 200 galleries at any given time, and they're always opening and closing, and that's just kind of a normal thing. But it will be, I'm a little anxious to see what that's actually going to look like this time next year.
It'll be interesting to see any business that makes it.
Support your local restaurants, galleries, all the little businesses. I mean, living with art makes a really big difference. I think all of us have an art collection to a certain extent, and it really does make a big difference every day when you wake up and you see something inspiring on your walls.
It's similar to making the art. I mean, it's therapeutic. Living with art is therapeutic as well. It's helpful.
Maybe Talia at the end, she can
play a song.
Play us out.
Okay. Well, it always sounds so weird over Zoom, but I'll try it.
If you're down to play a song, we would love that.
Let me find my ukulele while you guys.
Here you go. Just grab it.
So we'll close out with like a light, fluffy question for everybody, starting with Daniel. Sweet or salty?
Salty for breakfast, but I have a big sweet tooth.
Michael, sweet or salty?
I also have a big sweet tooth, but I'm actually going to say salty and more along those lines, spicy.
Talia,
salty or sweet?
Yes.
Well, I'm trying to stay away from sugar these days, so I'd have to say salty. Do we have to choose?
Yes. Oh. I mean, just for this moment.
I hate choosing things. I'm just terrible at it.
I would choose salty myself in food and in attitude.
Yes.
What about you, Anne?
I would also go with salty. I gotta say, I'm a big fan of brunch, and hopefully one of these days everybody will come over for a nice salty brunch. All right, Talia.
This is on my EP that's coming out. This is pretty much the only song that I have that's kind of, I guess, bluegrassy. You've heard it before, probably.
Frost, frost on my cherry tree. Loving you was easy, but it surely wasn't free. No cherries for you, no cherries for me. Why'd you have to go and freeze my cherry tree? Summertime, yeah, no cherries. Summertime, yeah, no cherries anymore. Oh, you knock me out with your gold and your trout. Let me with no cherry. Let me with no cherry. Let me with no cherry. You knock on that other girl's door. Tell her that you love her and then come around my door again. Speak, speak like a record of love. Spinning out your tunes round and round. Before you tell me my mind, then you change your mind. Don't know what you want from me. Cherry crime. Summertime, yeah, no cherries. Summertime, yeah, no cherries anymore. Oh, you knock me out with your cold and your drought. Let me with no cherry. Let me with no cherries. Let me with no cherries. You roll like a storm in the night. Killing all my cherries with your fury and your mind again. Frost, frost on my cherry tree. Loving you was easy, but it surely wasn't free. No cherries for you, no cherries for me. Why'd you have to go and freeze my cherry tree? Summertime, yeah, cherries. Summertime, yeah, no cherries anymore. Oh, you knock me out with your gold and your drought. Let me with no cherries. Let me with no cherries.
Yay!
Oh, you know what? The camera froze right at the beginning. Can you do that again? That was awesome.
Well, thank you, Talia, and thank you, everybody. I love you guys. Episode
Pleasure.
21 of Art in the Raw and the first Art in the Raw social hour. I had fun. I hope you guys did too. Thank you for anybody who's listening. We really appreciate you. And like, comment, subscribe. There's more episodes coming soon.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, everybody else, for the conversation. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
It was a lot of fun, y'all. Thank you all. Great to meet everyone. And thanks, Anne.
Oh, for sure.
All right, Zach, hit me up when you go to warehouse party, right?
All right, sounds good. I'll bring the Vapo rub.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ann. Thank
Have
you,
a great
everybody.
night. Take it
All
easy,
right.
y'all.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.